Hey guys, we have section 4 of Night again. We're going to read for a little while. I'm going to break it up into two sections again and have them posted for us for later on this week, alright? Section 4 begins. The camp looked as though it had suffered an epidemic, empty and dead. There were just a few well-clad prisoners walking about between the blocks. Of course, we had to go through the showers first. The head of our camp joined us there. He was a strong, well-built, broad-shouldered man. Bull neck, thick lip, frizzled hair. He looked kind. A smile shone from time to time in his gray-blue eyes. Our convoy included a few children, 10 and 12 years old. The officers took an interest in them and gave orders for them to be brought food. After we had been given new clothes, we were installed in two tents. We had to wait to be enlisted in the labor units. Then we could pass into the block. That evening, the labor units came back from the workyard. Roll call. We began to look for familiar faces, to seek information, to question the veteran prisoners about which labor unit was the best, which block one should try to get into. The prisoners all agreed, saying, "Buna's a very good camp. You can stand it. The important thing is not to get transferred to the building unit," as if the choice were in our own hands. The head of our tent was a German, an assassin's face, fleshy lips, hands like a wolf's paws. He was so fat he could hardly move. Like the leader of the camp, he loved children. As soon as we arrived, he had brought them bread, soup, and margarine. Actually, this was not disinterested affection. There was a considerable traffic in children among homosexuals here, I learned later. The head told us, "You're staying here 3 days in quarantine, then you're going to work. Tomorrow, medical inspection." One of his assistants, a hard-faced boy with hooligan's eyes, came up to me. "Do you want to get into a good unit?" "I certainly do, but on one condition. I want to stay with my father." "All right," he said. "I can arrange that, for a small consideration. Your shoes. I'll give you some others." I refused to give him my shoes. They were all I had left. "I'll give you an extra ration of bread and margarine." He was still very keen on my shoes, but I did not give them up to him. Later on, they were taken from me just the same, but in exchange for nothing this time. Medical examination in the open air in the early hours of the morning before 3 doctors seated on a bench. The first barely examined me at all. He was content merely to ask, "Are you in good health?" Who would have dared say anything to the contrary? The dentist, on the other hand, seemed most conscientious. He would order us to open our mouths wide. Actually, he was not looking for decaying teeth, but gold ones. Anyone who had gold in his mouth, he had his number added to a list. I myself had a gold crown. The first 3 days passed by rapidly. On the 4th day at dawn, when we were standing in front of the tent, the capos appeared. They each began to choose the men who suited him. You, 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 and you," they pointed a finger, as though choosing cattle or merchandise. We followed the capo, our capo, a young man. He made us stop at the entrance of the first block, near the door of the camp. This was the orchestra block. "Go in," he ordered. We were surprised. What had we to do with music? The band played a military march, always the same one. Dozens of units left for the workyard in step. The capo beat time. Left, right, left, right. Some SS officers, pen and paper in hand, counted the men as they went out. The band went on playing the same march until the last unit was gone by. Then the conductor's baton was still. The band stopped dead, and the capos yelled, "4 and 5s!" We left the camp without music, but in step. We still had the sound of the march in our ears. Left, right, left, right. We started talking to the musicians next to us. We drew up in ranks of 5 with the musicians. They were nearly all Jews. Juliek, a bespectacled Pole with the cynical smile on his pale face, Louis, a distinguished violinist who came from Holland, he complained that they would not let him play Beethoven. Jews are not allowed to play German music. Hans, a very lively Berliner, the foreman was a Pole, Frenek, a former student from Warsaw. Juliek explained to me, "We work in a warehouse for electrical equipment, not far from here. The work isn't in the least difficult or dangerous. But Edith, the capo, has bouts of madness now and then, when it's best to keep out of his way." "You're lucky, son," smiled Hans. "You've landed in a good unit." 10 minutes later, we were in front of the warehouse. A German employee, a civilian, the Meister, came to meet us. He paid us about as much attention as the dealer might who had just received a delivery of old rags. Our comrades had been right. The work was not difficult. Sitting on the ground, we had to count bolts, bulbs, and small electrical fittings. The capo explained to us at great length the vast importance of our work, warning us that anyone found slacking would have him to reckon with. My new comrades reassured me. "There is nothing to be scared of. He has to say that because of the Meister." There was a number of Polish civilians there, and a few French women, who were casting friendly glances at the musicians. Frenek, the foreman, put me in a corner. "Don't kill yourself. There's no hurry. But mind an SS man doesn't catch you unawares." "Please, I would have liked to be by my father." "All right, your father will be working by your side." We were lucky. There were 2 boys attached to our group, Yasi and Tibi, 2 brothers. They were Czechs whose parents had been exterminated at Birkenau. They lived, body and soul, for each other. They and I very soon became friends. Having once belonged to a Zionist youth organization, they knew innumerable Hebrew chants. Thus, we would often hum tunes evoking the calm waters of Jordan and the majestic sanctity of Jerusalem. And we would often talk of Palestine. Their parents, like mine, had lacked the courage to wind up their affairs and emigrate while there was still time. We decided that, if we were granted our lives until the liberation, we would not stay in Europe a day longer. We would take the first boat for Haifa. Still lost in the Kabbalistic dreams, Akiba Drummer had discovered a verse in the Bible which, interpreted in terms of numerology, enabled him to predict that the deliverance was due within the coming weeks. We had left the tents for the musician block. We were entitled to a blanket, a washbowl, and a bar of soap. The head of the block was a German Jew. It was good to be under a Jew. He was called Alphonse, a young man with an extraordinarily aged face. He was entirely devoted to the cause of his block. Whenever he could, he would organize a cauldron of soup for the young ones, the weak, and all who were dreaming more about an empty plateful than of liberty. One day, an extra plateful rather than liberty. One day, when we had just come back from the warehouse, I was sent for by the secretary of the block. "A7713? "That's me." "After eating, you are to go to the dentist." "But I haven't got a toothache." "After eating, without fail." I went to the hospital block. There were about 20 prisoners waiting in a queue in front of the door. It did not take long to discover why we had been summoned. It was for the extraction of the gold teeth. The dentist, a Jew from Czechoslovakia, had a face like a death mask. When he opened his mouth, there was a horrible sight of yellow, decaying teeth. I sat in the chair and asked him humbly, "Please, what are you going to do?" "Simply take out your gold crown," he replied indifferently. I had the idea of pretending to be ill. "You couldn't wait a few days, doctor? I don't feel very well. I got a temperature." He wrinkled his brow and thought for a moment and took my pulse. "All right, son. When you feel better, come back and you see me. But don't wait until I send for you." I went to see him a week later, with the same excuse. I still did not feel any better. He did not seem to show any surprise, and I do not know if he believed me. He was probably glad to see that I had come back on my own accord, as I had promised. He gave me another reprieve. A few days after this visit of mine, they closed the dentist's surgery, and he was thrown into prison. He was going to be hanged. It was alleged that he had been running a private traffic of his own in the prisoner's gold teeth. I did not feel any pity for him. I was even pleased about what had happened. I had saved my gold crown. It might be useful to me, one day to buy something, bread or life. I now took little interest in anything except my daily plate of soup and my crust of stale bread. Bread, soup, these were my whole life. I was a body, perhaps less than that even, a starved stomach. A stomach alone was aware. The stomach alone was aware of the passage of time. At the warehouse, I often worked next to a young French girl. We did not speak to one another, since she knew no German and I did not understand French. She seemed to me to be a Jewess, though here she passed for Aryan. She was a forced labor deportee. One day, when Edic was seized with one of his fits of frenzy, I got in his way. He leapt on me like a wild animal, hitting me in the chest, on the head, throwing me down and pulling me up again, his blows growing more and more violent until I was covered with blood. As I was biting my lips, to stop myself from screaming with pain. He must have taken my silence for defiance, for he went on hitting me even harder. Suddenly, he calmed down, as if nothing had happened. He sent me back to work. It was as though we had been taking part together in some game where we each had our role to play. I dragged myself to my corner. I ached all over. I felt a cool hand wiping my blood-stained forehead. It was the French girl. She gave me her mournful smile and slipped a bit of bread into my hand. She looked into my eyes. I felt that she wanted to say something but was choked by fear. For a long moment she stayed like that. Then her face cleared, and she said to me in almost perfect German, "Bite your lip, little brother. Don't cry. Keep your anger and hatred for another day, for later on. The day will come, but not now. Wait. Grit your teeth and wait." Now, many years later, in Paris, I was reading my paper in the metro. Facing me was a very beautiful woman with black hair and dreamy eyes. I had seen those eyes before somewhere. It was she. "You don't recognize me?" "I don't know you." "In 1944, you were in Germany, at Buna, weren't you?" "Yes." "You used to work in an electrical warehouse." "Yes," she said, somewhat disturbed. And then, after a moment's silence, "Wait a minute, I do remember you. Edith, the capo, the little Jewish boy. Your kind words." We left the metro together to sit down on the terrace of a cafe. We spent the whole evening reminiscing. Before I parted with her, I asked her, "May I ask you a question?" "I know what it will be. Go on." "What?" "I am Jewish." "Am I Jewish?" "Yes, I am Jewish. From a religious family. During the occupation, I obtained forged papers and passed myself off as Aryan. That's how I was enlisted in the forced labor groups. And when I was deported to Germany, I escaped the concentration camps. At the warehouse, no one knew I could speak German. That would have aroused suspicion. Saying those few words to you was risky, but I knew you wouldn't give me away. I think we're going to stop there for now, and I'll pick up the rest of the chapter a little bit later. Thanks, guys.